So like last week, I wanted to provide some comments about your discussion board postings. Paul and Roselle give that great idea for the All About Me boxes and the Connecting Home and School Literacies. I want you to consider how this can be a continuous process of inviting them into their identities and home literacies into your classroom. How can they be engaging in reading and writing and designing that would include their own identities? And really consider that throughout the school year. Also, it's important to talk to kids about what they have access to as far as technology at home and not just assume that rich kids have technology and poor kids don't. It's not quite as simplistic as that. A lot of the students in a very poor school that I've been working in this year actually have a great deal of technology available to them at home. And without talking to them and just assuming they don't have access to technology would be an incorrect assumption. And also consider how you can provide resources that would help parents at home and share those with them, and don't just assume that parents know what to do or choose not to do what would be good for students. They may not know or they may not have access to that information. A couple of quick notes about pedagogical content knowledge. Developing PCK alone, or traditional PCK, often takes quite a few years. You generally walk out of college knowing a good deal about pedagogy and a good deal about content, but learning pedagogical content knowledge takes a while because you have to learn how to match pedagogy and the content with your groups of students that you're working with. Therefore, if you're talking about technological pedagogical content knowledge where you're having to then envelop technology into this, it's going to take a while. And so it may mean that in the beginning, if you're still working out your own pedagogy and PCK, it may be you try a couple projects per year that uses technology or multimodality. And then you increase that as you go because it will take a while to really understand your students, understand the grade level, understand the curriculum that you're teaching, to be able to make these refined movements of PCK and then TPAC. Just a note about this because I saw this come up in a number of posts, and I know there are a lot of people that don't quite understand this, and this includes my colleagues at the doctoral level. I had a very long conversation. It took over 2 class periods to talk about what the difference is between Common Core state standards, curriculums, and programs. So the Common Core state standards were written from a group of governors associations, and 45 states initially adopted them. We're now down to 42 because 3 have backed away from this adoption in the past couple of weeks. Common Core state standards are a set of standards that indicate where students should be at a given point, either at the end of a grade level, when they graduate high school and then are going to college. So the standards were written for that purpose of really increasing what we expect of students and to meet this college and career readiness standard that No Child Left Behind kind of lowered the bar for quite a while. This was meant to raise the bar and really help people. Now, not to be somewhat critical, but I will be, this was not field tested anywhere, so nobody really tried the Common Core state standards before it rolled out. So what we are seeing the effects of is the fact that Common Core rolled out very quickly, so did the tests that went with it and everything that came with the test, the APPR, the teachers being graded. All of this came together very quickly, so a lot of what we're seeing now is a reaction to the fact that this rolled out too fast. Curriculum is expectations for teaching and learning, like the scope and sequence of a school year. It really tells you what should be learned in every subject area, every grade level. It would generally include objectives, lesson plans, focal points, and it may also include methods, materials, and assessments. A lot of times our districts are responsible for writing their own curriculum maps, and many districts do not write these or haven't updated them in a while. But generally, curriculum falls at the district level. What I'm seeing and hearing a lot about is the programs that we're struggling with. And the programs are written by obviously Pearson, Scott Forsman, and a number of other publishers. And currently they are writing them, or they say they have written them, to meet the Common Core state standards. The programs would include materials and methods to use within a curriculum to meet a set of standards. But in many districts, the programs become a curriculum because the district doesn't engage their own teachers in writing their own curriculum. So the book becomes then the script for a reading program or writing program or math program or whatnot. So what I'm hearing a lot about the frustration of Common Core tends to stem from some of these programs that we're using. I would even consider something like Engage New York to be a program. It's a free program, but it gives you the methods, the materials, and some districts have gone so far as to use this even as a scripted curriculum and whatnot. So while I'm not saying the Common Core state standards are completely valid the way they're written right now, what I am saying is the programs tend to be the issues that teachers and parents have with the Common Core, less about the standards themselves and more about what the programs are written and what they're saying and doing. I wanted to take a couple of moments to talk about multimodality. Just because kids are surrounded by multimodality everywhere they go, whether it's in video games, TV, movies, whatnot, you can't just tell kids, all right, we're going to make a digital video and let them go without any scaffolding. Bridget Delton talked quite a bit about, you need that right amount of scaffolding. You don't want to do too much. You don't want to do too little. But you can't assume that kids know how to make a video just because they've watched tons of videos. And this is an example of kids picking incorrect modes to go together, things that don't match. So what you're about to watch is a presentation about acid rain, and note the incorrect mode that wouldn't make sense. So if you noticed, a lion's roar really has nothing to do with acid rain that anyone could possibly gather. This is based on my advisor dissertation research. So she listened to the kids' speech and whatnot, and they picked the lion roar because they thought it was fun. It's not because it had a purpose. But if you're really thinking multimodality-wise, kids should be picking modes that fit together and layer the meaning, kind of like I asked you to do for this poetry project. The modes shouldn't be detracting from the meaning, but you can't quite assume that kids know how to use any of these resources well. Do they know where to place text, or can they think about interesting ways to place text? They may not be able to unless you are engaging them in different ways of thinking about this. So I really see what Dalton described, this workshop model where there are mini lessons, kids are working individually, teachers are kind of pushing thinking along and conferencing with students, might be one of the best ways to do this. And as another point, multimodality is very much something that you should be using with adolescent students. I heard a couple comments about questions about, is this relevant? Absolutely. So while some of the articles might be more elementary focused, multimodality is very important for older students to be representing their learning. Again, they're very much engaged in watching, doing outside of school, but they may not know all the pieces they need to know to really be creating multimodal things well. And I would also assume a lot of these students who are heading to college will be engaged in jobs that will use multimodality in some way, shape, or form. I use my brother as an example. He's about to start the New Media Design Studies program at the Rochester Institute of Technology. And design is obviously very much part of what he's doing. I actually just asked him to do my wedding invitations. But he's self-taught a lot of how to do design at this point because there hasn't been this opportunity in school. And even when we engage kids in these projects, we don't necessarily teach them how to create something. We just let them go and think that they can do it. And they might know some of what they're doing, but it's that tacit knowledge that they can't quite talk about because they don't have the words to talk about it. But if we were to give them the words, that meta language that you read about, if they had the words to talk about it, they'd be a lot better off. Just a quick point about the love story in 22 pictures. I heard a lot of people say this is a great visual mode example. It is definitely visual, obviously, but there are other modes at play in here as well, including gesture, spatial orientation, spatial relationships, as well as these other parts of the visual mode, like facial expression and whatnot. So while it is definitely visual, there are other modes in this. So this is an example of a multimodal story, even though it doesn't use very many linguistic words. For when you're thinking about like teachers and learners, we've probably got two different perspectives on multimodality in the classroom. For you as teachers, you really need to think about how you're selecting modes for your lessons and activities. As an example, you might want to consider how visuals and gesture impact your teaching. And one of the teachers I've worked with this year, she constantly will turn to me and be frustrated during the class day when her students don't listen to her directions. She said them multiple times out loud and whatnot, but she rarely ever provides more than her linguistic speech for the directions. She's not providing a visual or anything. She's not necessarily having them repeat it back. So there's something that's happening there. I don't quite have the answer to exactly what she should do. She should write down the directions or whatnot. But I suspect that part of the issue that she's having is her directions tend to be almost always in linguistic form, and she needs to consider how else she might be able to present that information so that she's not frustrated and the students aren't frustrated when they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. As another example, this same teacher was teaching about cause and effect. And the first day, I'm not going to say it was a train wreck lesson, but it wasn't the best lesson ever. So she revisited and thought about it, and she's like, I'm going to redo this lesson the next day. And she didn't plan this, but what she ended up doing was gestures that matched cause and effect. So cause was always her left hand, effect was always her right hand, and she repeated this with multiple examples of what a cause and effect might be. So for example, if I were to eat 12 candy bars, I will gain weight. That type of thing. And every time she would give an example, she'd use her left hand for the cause, right hand for the effect. Both she and I noted that the kids really did well on the assignment that day, which was the exact same as the day before. But it was very fascinating to watch how her gestures seemed to very much impact what they were learning and how they approached that assignment that day, which was the exact same assignment, exact same material that they were reading. Her instructions were different because of the gesture. And I did point out to her how great I thought it was. For your students, multimodality should really be about how they represent their learning in the classroom. So last video I showed you the Bloom's taxonomy and all of that. How can your students be evaluating and creating those highest levels of Bloom's taxonomy? Does it mean you always have to be doing multimodality, or they always have to be at those high levels? No, you have to build to the high levels, but you really should be considering how can they represent their learning using multimodality, whether it's with technology or without. I wanted to briefly talk about the difference between multiple intelligences and multimodality. There are some similarities and some crossover, but really multiple intelligences are styles of learning that are best fit for certain students. So for example, I tend to be a visual person. If you just talked at me all day long, I would struggle because I can't listen for that long and pay attention. Multimodality is a broader idea which encompasses using multiple modes in communication and representation. So multimodality would be included in each of these areas of multiple intelligence learning. So one of the ways I've started to think about multiple intelligence is selection of the activities you want students to do. And then multimodality would be within each of these activities probably and how you would approach it. So for example, you could very well have students engage in a dramatic reading of a play. So within this dramatic reading, there would probably be this interpersonal bodily kinesthetic, you'd be maybe using facial expressions and whatnot. But all of what they're doing would be multimodal within this representation and dramatic play. I hope this helps to clarify it. I know quite a few people were equating multimodality and multiple intelligences and were slightly confused as to where the line was drawn. And just one quick point, because I don't like these terms a whole lot, but they're used quite a bit. Digital natives and digital immigrants aren't always as simple as, say everybody under the age of 30 is a digital native and everyone over 30 is a digital immigrant. Think about the kids under 30 that don't have access to technology or choose not to use technology. They probably would not be considered a native because they don't have that level of comfort of use of technology. Whereas there are a number of digital immigrants, myself and being the over the age of 30 category included, who are very comfortable with technology, use it all the time, can figure out a good chunk of problems. I'm not computer programming, but I know my way around a computer quite well. And think of people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. They're older than the age of 30 or 35 or 40, but they would much be more of a digital native than most anybody else would be because they worked with computers either, in Steve Jobs' case, for his entire life and now he's passed, or Bill Gates continues to work with him. So just be cautious of using these terms and thinking that they mean very separate things for different age groups, and they don't necessarily. And there was a couple questions or thoughts about these couple of words, and I wanted to mention them. I'm not terribly concerned if you know the difference between mode and semiotic resource or synesthesia and transmediation. Not a huge concern. But a mode would be that simple unit of meaning and representation, and the semiotic resource is the connection between these resources and what we do with them. So they're the actions, materials, and artifacts we're using for communication. So this same idea is where Gunther Kress came from when he talked about the sign having a form and a meaning. So a road sign has a meaning not because it's a diamond shape and has a deer on it, but it's because our United States culture has ascribed that meaning. That if you see a diamond with a little jumping deer, look out, there's deer ahead. That's because our culture has assigned that meaning to it. So that's what that sign means. So it's not because the diamond shape and the deer, independent, they're each resources, but we're ascribing the meaning to it from our culture. And synesthesia and transmediation, from the best I can figure, do mean the same thing. I'm pretty sure Cope and Clancis mentioned this in one of their books or articles, but I can't put my finger directly on it at the moment. So you can use either term. I tend to use the word transmediation because of where this term came from, the philosophers it came from, and where I align myself. So either term, wherever you feel most comfortable and what you feel most comfortable using, go ahead and use that.